Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 63. I am the show's host, Kyle. Very excited to be here today. Got a lot of good stuff to talk about. Today, fortunately, it kind of worked out that the big news story occurred right before I'm recording and not right after, which seems to usually happen. So, gonna lead off the show today talking about the Trump-Putin meeting. Obviously, the meeting of the two most important people of the world. If you look at the nuclear arsenal that both countries sit on, we're always just a few minutes from one of these world leaders feeling like they need to launch nukes now and the rest of us being dead. So, like I said, most important half-hour meeting that may have ever taken place in history has just happened. Hopefully this is a kickoff to a good relationship. I'll get into a little bit more of the details later. If you like the show, please think about sharing the show with friends, family, whoever you think will listen, or just post it to your Facebook or Twitter. You can find my show at my Facebook page, Kyle's Files, files spelled with a Y, or at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. Thank you so much to everybody who's listening, and especially to those of you who take the extra couple minutes to share the show. It means a lot and helps the show to grow. Alright, now let's get into it. This is Friday, July 7th, 2017, and we have Vladimir Putin meeting Donald Trump in person, apparently for the first time, definitely since the two became both heads of state. I guess in the lead up to the meeting, the questions are how long is the meeting going to take place? The meeting turns out to be 30 minutes from what I've heard. That was a pretty strict schedule. They didn't run over. I know that both Putin and Trump tend to run over on meetings when they're really interesting, but maybe that didn't happen this time. Obviously, they're meeting because they're both in, I believe, Poland for the G20 summit, but if I got the wrong European city, that's not a huge deal. 6 people in total attended the meetings. It was President Donald Trump, President of Russia Vladimir Putin, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and I think Foreign Minister is the equivalent in Russian, Sergei Lavrov. And then an interpreter or a translator for each side also attended the meeting. So in total we have 6 people here. Apparently there was some controversy leading into the meeting about who would attend. Vladimir Putin had pushed for more top advisors for each side to attend the meeting when Trump only wanted to limit it to 6. 2 people who either got the ats or who Trump openly said he didn't want at the meeting were H.R. McMaster and Fiona Hill. For those of you who don't know who Fiona Hill is, she is, I think the State Department, I guess she heads the office at the State Department for Europe and Russia, so that's her role. She's very high up there. She's apparently the one that would know everything about Russia within the State Department and everything. They really want her to attend. According to Marcy Wheeler at Empty Wheel, I think it's just emptywheel.com, but you follow her on Twitter at Empty Wheel. She's great, really good about the cybersecurity stuff and just reporting on some other, little minor details. And this one she said that Trump didn't want McMaster and Hill to attend the meeting because he was afraid of leaks coming out from these two. So these are 2 people that I really don't care if Trump distances some from. I've made my position pretty clear on H.R. McMaster in past episodes. I could link to one in the show notes about that I covered my feelings on McMaster. And Fiona Hill, I tried to read up a little bit on her because I didn't know too much about her coming in to today's show, but it looks like she's kind of a career State Department person, definitely not somebody who you would associate with the Trump movement, and seems to me to be more of a, kind of an establishment character. Following the meeting, Sergei Lavrov, like I said, Foreign Minister at Russia, said that the topics discussed and agreed that Russia and the U.S. would work together on were a Syrian ceasefire, to open channels of communication in Ukraine, cybersecurity and looking into just how to prevent cybersecurity attacks, and an agreement for each country to appoint new ambassadors to the other. I think this is so I guess I'll just go through all 4 and say why I'm excited about each one. The Syrian ceasefire, definitely, to me, the most exciting. The people of Syria have suffered for so long. So many hundreds of thousands have been killed. So many millions displaced from their home. Polio is now outbroken. There are so many medical facilities that are destroyed, that so many people are just dying from preventable causes, and nothing can be built in wartime, and wartime only means destruction. So I think any amount of peace that we could get coming out of Syria would definitely be a good thing. And if the U.S. and Russia could work together to set up a ceasefire, it definitely reduces the possibility of U.S. and Russian jets engaging one another over the skies of Syria. I think if you were to ask both people, just the average citizen in both Russia and the United States, if it was worth it to go to nuclear war over Syria, I think both would say no. It just seems complete insanity to me. that both Russia and the United States at least say they're both fighting ISIS, that ISIS is the number one enemy in Syria, and yet they can't get along to fight ISIS and instead continue to risk conflict over the skies of Syria. Open channels on Ukraine is a big one. In the past, it seems to me that people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham going into the Ukraine and telling Ukrainian government troops to rally and fight against the Russian supported rebels definitely isn't something that helps relations within Ukraine. And any chance that Russia has to call the United States, and maybe this will give Putin an opportunity to lean on Trump a little bit and say, hey, tell those two coots to shut up. The fact that Ukraine came up as a topic is a good thing. Hopefully, Vladimir Putin was able to state the Russian case on Ukraine, even if you don't necessarily agree with the Russian case. If you look at the facts, just that the people of Ukraine voted to join Russia and those results were pretty legitimate, and then all Russia did is, tell the Ukrainian troops to get out of Ukraine and leave the Russian base that was already located in Ukraine, that this certainly isn't an offense by Russia that's worthy of direct conflict with the United States. And I hope Putin was able to convey that message to Donald Trump. I think it's a pretty sellable point. I don't think Putin's arguing anything extreme just by saying, hey, Donald, the people want to be a part of Ukraine. By Putin saying, hey, Donald, look here, the people of Crimea rather be a part of Russia than Ukraine. Your predecessor, Barack Obama, hired this person, Victoria Nuland, who orchestrated a coup in Ukraine. And the people of the Crimea really didn't like the new government, so they wanted to vote to join Russia. And you might not like that, but that's the way things are now. And I think Trump could undoubtedly upset that with too much conflict. The cybersecurity coalition and agreement to work together here, a couple things I want to talk about on this. Just there's been a lot of, big cybersecurity threats in Ukraine recently, so kind of right on Russia's doorstep, and maybe that was a bigger issue for Putin at this time for that reason. Maybe Putin's thinking it'll score him some political points in Russia. I'm sure Russians take more note of Ukrainian news than Americans do, and those cyber attacks going on in Ukraine certainly probably startle some Russians. Also, it seems to me that if they agree to work together on this, there must be some understanding between Trump and Putin that Trump does believe Putin to some extent that he didn't hack the DNC servers. It seems to me that the director of NSA, Mike Rogers, had said that he couldn't get Trump to believe it, and hopefully Putin once again got to convey his case that, hey, this wasn't the Russian government. From my understanding, seeing some tweets coming out about the meeting, no real official articles on this yet or anything that would make me to believe this is 100% true. So, take it, at whatever value you place on a tweet from the AP just saying that it does seem that the hacking was discussed at the meeting and denied by Putin. The new ambassadors to be appointed in each country is a good thing. I'm not sure if Trump had actually appointed anybody to Russia yet. I think he had thrown out a couple names, both of them being hawkish towards Russia. So with all the controversy surrounding the Russian ambassador to the U.S., it'll probably be good for Trump and the rest of the Republicans to get that ambassador out of there. Of course, he had meetings with Sessions that were highly questioned, and he had talked to Mike Flynn and other things like this that created a lot of problems. So getting him out of D.C., and maybe they agreed to send kind of softballs to each other. That way they could keep open channels of communications and can maybe bypass some of the more hawkish winds in each of their respective countries. So that's all I got on the meeting so far. Like I said, this is relatively new. I'm recording about 5 p.m. Eastern time today, and like they said, I think the meeting occurred around noon time or got out around noon time. So hopefully we are going to, see some more positive meetings between Trump and Putin and moving forward. Like I had said before, this is the most important relationship in the world. It was the most important meeting in the world. Each of these two men have the capability to destroy the rest of the world, and while, you could maybe argue that India or Pakistan would have a similar ability, it certainly isn't to the extent of the United States and Russia, each equipped with, I believe, thousands, if not hundreds of H-bombs. Absolute destruction. I mean, it could all be over in a couple hours if either one of these people decide to attack the other. And I hope Vladimir Putin was able to convey that message to Donald Trump during this meeting. One thing that I took away from the Putin interviews was that Vladimir Putin seems to understand the nuclear issue fairly well. Whenever he talked about the nuclear issue, he seemed very somber, very serious. Like he understood the weight that was on his shoulders, that he's really given this responsibility where he could destroy the other half of the world very easily. And that would absolutely mean retaliation. It's a case of, at best, murder-suicide for either side, right? Everybody's going to end up dead. And so, I guess Vladimir Putin at all times has to consider that if his generals say, hey, these things are on our radars and they sure look like nuclear weapons and we're real worried about should we launch ours, he only has a couple minutes to decide if he wants to bring about the end of the world. And hopefully he was able to convey that same thing to Trump. I think Trump, while I care less about his goofy tweets about what Mika Brzezinski or Kathy Griffin or whoever else, I mean, that stuff really isn't meaningful the way I look at the world, but I do think it shows Trump kind of not having a respect for the office that comes with the vast arsenal of nuclear weapons that he has. And maybe Putin could, explain that to him, and even if Trump continues to act, stupid on Twitter, at least take the finger on the button issue a little more seriously. Other news coming out of the U.S. The U.S. is going to start to delay the announcement of troop deaths in Afghanistan. Looks like it'll be about 24 hours after Netzkin is notified before they even release any information that somebody in the a United States soldier died in Afghanistan. In the past, they had announced the death but not announced the identity until after the soldier's family was notified. However, the United States argues that there are so few soldiers in Afghanistan at this point that it's obvious to the families that, whoever died by just the release of details, like a member of the army, whatever, infantry died in the Helmand province. Upsides and downsides to this. Obviously, if somebody's family member died, I don't, wish the family to find out by watching CNN that their son died. That's kind of crappy. But at the same time, it seems like this is just another excuse to be more secretive about the information coming out of Afghanistan. Obviously, anytime a U.S. soldier dies, it reflects poorly on the administration. So if Donald Trump wants to be a great world leader, at least, every single troop death is a kind of a stain on his legacy. So I'm guessing Trump, will want to delay this, these announcements as long as possible. It does seem to me an odd time since the U.S. is considering deploying more troops in Afghanistan that now they're worried about there's so few that we have to make these changes. Other news, Hobby Lobby was either fined or had to forfeit $3 million worth of artifacts that were allegedly smuggled from Iraq around the time of the Iraq War II. I think this is kind of an interesting story, and I don't know exactly what my feelings on are, and I obviously don't have all the details on it either, but what seems to have happened is that during the second Iraq War, a lot of artifacts were being smuggled out of Iraq. I think at times they were probably stolen and then sold, and at other times they were smuggled out of Iraq in an attempt to save them, because when things fall into chaos, museums get looted and places get destroyed and burned and bombed. And so Hobby Lobby saw themselves as doing a favor kind of to society by saving all these artifacts. Certainly if you look at what happened in Iraq, where you had ISIS move through and then go through and destroy monuments like the Al-Nuri Mosque or something like this, you could obviously see that Hobby Lobby's concerns were somewhat valid, and maybe they did save a lot of these artifacts from being destroyed at the hands of ISIS. However, I'm sure a lot of these were probably stolen, and that maybe the original owners, or maybe the Iraqi government was the owner, maybe they were in Saddam's possession, but the people of Iraq really should have been in some way compensated for these artifacts that they were taken by Hobby Lobby. Just another interesting part of the story was it looks like all these artifacts were smuggled out of Iraq through either Israel or the UAE, American allies. And so I guess it's just kind of interesting to me that thinking that if this was smuggled through Russia or through North Korea or through Iran, how the spin would be in the media. But since it's American allies, it just kind of goes down as another footnote. Reports from the UN say that 300 UN peacekeepers were accused of sexual crimes in 2016. Of these 300 people who were accused, there were around 900 or so accusers. I think a lot of people were probably disturbed that there were multiple reports against so many UN agents, making it seem like they were a little bit more legitimate. Obviously, this is a problem that has plagued the UN since, even the end of the last century. And so it just shows that this continues to be a problem. And these poor people, right? Like the West pretends that they're sending in peacekeepers when really they're sending in serial rapists. Sir Chilcot, who did the kind of famed Chilcot report in the UK, saying that Tony Blair lied about the UK's involvement in the Iraq war. Of course, this is the second Iraq war, 2003, and the lead up to it, where the UK and US really worked together to push for this war in Iraq. Tony Blair and George Bush spearheaded the movement in the UN and on the international stage. Chilcot said that Blair was not honest with the UK people in the lead up to the report. So while not groundbreaking news in the United States, I know I have some international listeners and just like to update all the stories dealing with foreign policy and lives that involve empires. Alright, so we're going to get into this North Korea ICBM issue now. First off, I was tweeting with Scott Horton this morning, so if anybody, I suggest you follow myself and Scott Horton on Twitter. I'm at KYAAALE. Scott is at Scott Horton Show. So I had read an article saying that Russia was now saying that there wasn't an ICBM launched by North Korea and they had the best radar on the missile and it was just a second stage missile. Or I guess it suggests that the missile has two stages, like two different burns, and is able to go longer for that reason, but it wasn't an ICBM. Obviously, the big problem with the ICBM is intercontinental, which means it could possibly hit Alaska, which had a lot of people very concerned in the United States that it now seems like North Korea actually has the technology to hit the United States. Scott said people are unsure if North Korea has made nuclear weapons small enough to actually load them up on these ICBMs. Obviously, the nuclear weapons have to be really big. Some of them, at least the kind of the preliminary ones, if you look at how the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs worked, right, they were pushed out of airplanes and not put on ICBMs. And I don't know if a bombs that size could even fit on the ICBMs. I think they have to be made fairly small, so it's unknown if the missiles, even if they are ICBMs, can carry these weapons. This was also the original narrative in the U.S., and this seems to have gotten lost, but the first reports coming out of the U.S. government said it was just a second stage missile. The U.S. at the UN called for more sanctions against North Korea and for regimes that support North Korea. This was obviously big news because this kind of suggests that we would put sanctions on China for this. Of course, China being a very close ally of the United States. I believe these statements were made by Nikki Haley at the UN, and that means that it went through the high levels of the security of the State Department. Russia vetoed the resolution that said that the UN condemned the ICBM tests by North Korea and the push for sanctions against other countries in North Korea. Haley, like I said before, very hawkish, continues to be on North Korea. She said that the U.S. Is leaving the option for military actions against North Korea on the table, but they prefer not to use them. We also got statements out of the U.S. saying that the diplomatic window to do it diplomatically with North Korea is closing. One of the problems is there are even some people who I would consider on the good part of the left or the right that would, tell you that we don't want to be in aggressive wars, but North Korea, if they have an ICBM and a nuclear weapon that could fit on it, that's enough justification to go to war with North Korea. But, this is simply ridiculous. Even if North Korea did have these capabilities, they can only reach at most Alaska, and the population density isn't that much. There's been several times throughout the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, remember both of these countries border Iran, that there were more Americans at risk from, from missile strikes from Iran than would probably be at risk from a nuclear weapon launched by North Korea. Obviously, the missiles are pretty low tech. This is a communist regime here. You expect a lot of failures. You don't think that Kim Jong-un is capable of running a missile and a missile company and a nuclear weapons company is obviously right. And while they certainly have piled a lot of their country's output into the military, they have a massive military. They spend a lot on all this stuff, and while the people starve, that still only gets you so far. You see all the failed missile tests that have come out of North Korea and stuff like that suggest that their programs maybe aren't as solid as the mainstream media always makes them out to be. Obviously, if you look at just the mainstream media, North Korea is always an existential threat to the United States, and that just doesn't seem to be the case. We continue to see offers put on the table that North Korea will roll back missile test programs and nuclear weapons tests in exchange for the United States halting some of these training games and war games with the South Koreans, but the United States won't do it. And so for the United States, if all of you had to do is relocate the war games being fought from South Korea to San Francisco or San Diego to get North Korea to end their nuclear weapons program, if you're really concerned about the nuclear weapons program, you would absolutely follow through with that. It's all fake. It's all just more hawkishness and propaganda, gain Americans to be willing to spend more money on the military. Remember, fiscal year 2018, if you include the amount of interest that the U.S. has to pay on war debt, we're going to be dropping over $1 trillion on defense alone. In Saudi Arabia, a police officer was killed in clashes with Shiites who are protesting the destruction of their town. The Saudi government claims that the buildings in the town are unsafe and they're trying to destroy them, but I think this started around May 7th. The Shiites have been protesting and trying to keep this from happening. This is happening in one of the oldest Shiite towns within Iran, or within Saudi Arabia. About 12 people have so far been killed in clashes. In Israel, we had the Israeli government announcing 300 new Israeli homes to be built in East Jerusalem, and then about 100 new Palestinian homes that may be built in East Jerusalem. In 2016, 200 Palestinian homes were destroyed by the Israeli government. This displaced over 1,200 people, and a lot of these home destructions were in retaliation because some member of the owners of the home, some family member of the owners of the home were involved in or suspected to be involved in attacks against the Israeli state. Al Jazeera did a really good workup on this. They kind of detailed, photographed, and really documented every single one of these homes destroyed. If you're not reading my news roundup every day, this kind of stuff is always in there. News coming out of Syria is that we have peace talks going on, I believe, in Kazakhstan right now. The Syrian government had a ceasefire for 4 days leading into the peace talks. And it's looking like, with, maybe some U.S. and Russia agreement that we could need a ceasefire, that we could have something positive coming out of here. And we did see that the United States and Russia did announce that they have agreed to a no-fly zone ceasefire in southwest Syria. So that looks good to me. The other big news coming out of Syria is on the Syrian and Turkish border in northeast Syria, where the YPG is on one side of the border and the Turkish army is on the other side. You have high-ranking Kurdish generals saying that the Turkish troop movements to the border amount to a declaration of war, and they expect war to break out within days. Of course, this would put a serious halt on the U.S. operations in Raqqa, where the United States is moving towards seizing the city from ISIS, but the Kurds have to defend Kurdish land from the Turkish army. They will likely do that rather than try to take Arab land from ISIS. In Syria, General Haftar claims to have retaken the entire city of Benghazi. For the past 3 years or so, Islamists have held several neighborhoods in the city. In Mosul, ISIS launched a counterattack against the Iraqi army and reportedly took about 83 yards worth of ground from the Iraqi army. Tensions are increasing between the Iraqi army and civilians. I saw some reporting from an Iraqi lieutenant general in Mosul saying that all the civilians left, which is about between 15 and 20,000 civilians that remain in ISIS-held areas of Mosul, are all related to ISIS. Every single male is being sent to be checked to see if they're members of ISIS, and it's just creating a lot of problems between the army and the civilians, and just more hostilities, I'm sure, making the operations more difficult. The lieutenant general also estimated that about 300 ISIS fighters remain in the city. In Mexico, we have gang shootings killing about 14 people. A lot of these gang clashes going on right now are in response to El Chapo being taken out of Mexico and leaving the power vacuum. And in the Philippines, we have the main financial backer of the ISIS-linked group that is currently holding the city of Marawi, apparently being captured. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but it sounds like there's a lot of stories going on in the world right now, and I hope I was able to wrap them all up for you, and you have time to listen to this over the weekend. So I hope everybody enjoys the show. Please share the show, and subscribe to the show on iTunes, and leave me a rating and review there. I'm on Facebook at Kyle's Files, and the private Facebook group is Foreign Policy Focus. My website is kylesfilesblog.com. My Twitter is at KYAAALE. The website for this podcast is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. And you can also find my work on the libertarianinstitute.org. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in this week, and I'll be back next week, hopefully with Will Porter.